So, good morning, good afternoon, colleagues, wherever you are from calling in around the world. I can see a number of different countries listed on the chat, so it's great to see colleagues from the field joining this conversation today. Welcome to today's session on a person-centered approach to security risk management. We're going to explore the benefits and the challenges. We'll also hear from two organizations sharing their best practice from implementing this approach in their organizations. I'm Bridget Hancock, Senior Field Security Officer for UNHCR. I have the privilege today of moderating today's discussion. We're joined by colleagues from the INGO and NGO sector, as well as the private sector, who I will introduce before each of their interventions, and we'll have a chance to talk to them in a lot of depth in the Q&A session as well. Just to give you a little bit of information on the UN security system and our view on person-centered approach in SRM, I thought it might frame today's discussion. So in the UN security management system, we've come a long way from the cookie cutter security risk assessments from the days gone by. In our UN workforce and across the broader humanitarian sector, we recognize that core values, diversity and inclusivity make us stronger. In UNHCR, particularly in the Field Security Service, and in the UN system more broadly, we constantly advocate that inclusive, diverse, and people-centered security teams and security risk management is not a nice-to-have principle, but it's actually essential to ensure effective and equitable security, and to ensure our operations run at acceptable levels of risk for everybody. Historically, security risk management has been a one-size-fits-all homogeneous personnel group, where all persons are treated equally in a context. However, in the UN system, we're started to see person-centered approach to security with gender considerations. We looked at inclusion and responsivity. We then turned to disability considerations and inclusion. Now we're looking at striving to more inclusivity in ensuring equity in security risk management, ensuring that we're responsive and dynamic to all people and their intersectional factors, i.e. a person-centered approach. Personnel have differentiated risk levels based on who they are, what they're doing, where they're doing it, and who they work with. In UNHCR, we look at personal risk profiles and intersectionality as a prism for understanding threats and their associated risks. A person's race, religion, tribal affiliation, language, geographical provenance, experience, religion, sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity, disability, and age, and the convergence of each of these factors is what makes personnel individual, but it also has a role in determining their threats in the environment and the likelihood and impact of those threats on our personnel. This intersectional and person-centered approach must also be a prism when looking at analyzing the context and the potential impact to the organization, security analysis, or in identifying and implementing security risk management measures, and of course, evaluation programs. I'm going to play a short video in intersectionality to remind us all what it is that we're talking about when we refer to a person-centered approach. After the clip, we're going to dive straight into an interactive webinar session. So we'll ask you to download or open Mentimeter on your device, whether it's a phone or laptop. But before we do, we're just going to do a quick, thank you, Megan, she's popped up the Mentimeter details for you. We're going to do a quick housekeeping just so everyone is on the same page in terms of how we move forward. So we're going to run this session around 90 minutes. Please introduce yourself in the chat. It'd be great to know where you're calling in from and who you're representing today. It's an interactive event, so we'd love to hear your perspective. Certainly not a one-way channel. We are recording this session for note-taking purposes, and a summary version of the notes will be available and shared with an HNPW. Please stay muted unless you want to speak. Please turn on your camera. It makes a much more dynamic discussion. And for any technical issues, reach out to GISF production in the chat. And of course, if you have any questions for the panelists, please put them into the chat at any time throughout today's session. So we might move to one more time the Mentimeter details for colleagues, just to take a picture so they can do this while we're playing a quick snapshot video for you. I see Megan's also put it in the chat. Thank you very much.
What is intersectionality? Intersectionality refers to the way race, gender, class, sexuality, and other parts of who we are overlap with one another. People from different backgrounds experience the world differently. Intersectionality helps explain how parts of who we are come together to determine who has power in our society and who does not. People are complex, and many factors contribute to our identities and experiences. We cannot look only at one part of our humanity. We have to look at the whole picture and all the factors that impact our identity and experience in society.
All UN personnel do not experience risk equally, even within the same context. Differentiated risk management measures need to be put in place so that the resultant level of risk is acceptable for everyone.
So that gets our juices flowing for our Mentimeter interactive session. So I'd like you to open up your Mentimeter. The details are also in the chat. And we're going to move straight into a couple of questions.
What is intersectionality?
Just give you a couple of seconds to load your Mentimeter. The code is 36712355. The questions should display very shortly on your screens, and then we'll be able to walk through each of them together and see how we all think. So to open the first question, what does a person-centered approach mean to you? Fantastic. Tailored, moving beyond blank profiles, taking into consideration people's backgrounds, a lot more work and a lot more interesting workplace, of course. Diversity, empowerment, that's a good one. Yeah, I think this is exceptional, certainly to better understand and mitigate unique risk factors. You know, at the end of the day, we're not just coming up with assessments. The idea is to make it safer for everyone to continue to do what they need to do. Considering diverse capacities and needs, absolutely. I also think it was interesting what the colleague mentioned about how security risks may target specific individuals and impact someone differently, and therefore the measures may need to be based on someone's personal characteristics and identity. Absolutely. Couple more seconds in case there are some last minute entries coming in. Yeah, and keeping people at the center of our business, not just our assessments, I think. All right, let's move to the next question. So how might security risk management change with a person-centered approach? Tumbleweeds. Hopefully we have a few colleagues jumping in on this one. So what do you think might be different? What are the challenges? What might be the changes in an SRM process or in SRM generally, considering PCA? Oh, we might have a little technical glitch. So what we can maybe do in the interim is to pop your input into the chat if you feel comfortable being named while we're still working on the technical side. Okay.
Emily, you showed the direct screen from Mentimeter last time, which seemed to work. Perhaps we should try that again.
I have just tried. For some reason, the results aren't showing up.
Okay.
I will look into this.
Okay, do you want to carry on, Bridget? And if people can keep putting the answers in, we'll come back to them.
Absolutely.
Technical
So
work.
you can also pop them in the chat. Anyone who wants to put their perspective on how an SRM might change in involving person-centered approaches. Another thing to think about also is what personal characteristics do we think most impacts SRM for international colleagues. So the Mentimeter will show a number of characteristics. I'm not sure if it is moving to the next screen. No. So in our interactive discussion, perhaps you can pop that in the chat too. So what kind of characteristics do you think play a role in the security risk management of international personnel? Certainly their nationality may play a large part of the factors and risks that they may face in a context. What else might be something that they need to factor into the SRM processes when considering international colleagues? Looks like Mentimeter might be back working.
How about we move on to Lisa if she's ready, and then come back to, hopefully Mentimeter will have refreshed.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so why don't we move to the next section? I'll introduce our next speaker, and while she's getting started, oh, we have action. Should we try it one more time? I don't want to jinx it now that it's working. Let's give it a go. Okay, so yes, more complexity as we have to adapt it to meet individuals' needs. It definitely needs to become a lot more agile, process-wise, bureaucratic-wise, approval-wise. More detailed threat and vulnerability assessments, absolutely. And to take into account that intersectional layers and factors. More detail required, more perspectives, absolutely. So there needs to be absolutely more consultation, updated trainings, definitely. I don't think our previous approaches will cut the mustard in this case. Consider different training and experience, more collaboration, certainly a lot of conversations and seeking input from others. Might wait a couple more seconds because we had some technical difficulties. Yeah, absolutely. So looking at things more holistically, looking at individuals and how different threats may affect them and what they need to reduce the impact of those threats or the likelihood of those threats to them. Okay, let's move to the next question, if it works. So our next question is, what personal characteristics do you think have the most impact on SRM for international colleagues? So we've already had two, gender and race. different training and experience. We have a couple of colleagues in the chat. Thank you so much, Francesca and Tala. Colonial perspectives dominating the agenda, power dynamics, representation at the table, absolutely. Physical appearance, thank you, Colleen. Yeah, Gavin, I agree with you. It does depend on the context. Sometimes religion will play a big factor, or race, or disability, or marital status, and other times it will be other factors. So definitely context and environment dependent, and cultural dependence as well. Disability, yes. So it looks like actually we're saying that all of the factors play a big role. In some contexts, age, perception of maturity has an impact. Yes, I can certainly say so. For my previous region, it was a very important factor in terms of having a voice at the table. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So the same question, but for our local colleagues. So what personal characteristics do we think have the most impact on SRM, security risk management, for our national staff? Does it differ? Same. Interesting. Again, I think this is largely context dependent if I pull on Gavin's comment earlier. Certainly in some contexts, tribal affiliations play a very big role, or religious affiliations, socioeconomic status. Thank you, Peter. Tala thinks the same as before. Thank you for everyone else's agility and kind of moving towards the chat. Sometimes in this technological age, we kind of fall back to the areas we know work. All right, and a final question, and I'd be interested to know your perspective, is who should be involved in managing the person-centered approaches in SRM? Do you think it should be a holistic purpose? Do you think it's the sole responsibility of a security colleague? Who do you think should be involved in the process? Francesca says holistic. Colleen. So when we say holistic, maybe we're also talking about managers, exactly, decision makers. In the UN security system, we have a couple of categories. We have security decision makers, personnel with security responsibilities, and then all staff. So for us, it would be all three of those categories would be responsible for implementing this in security risk management. I see in the chat that everyone kind of has the same idea. That's fantastic. And it's good to know we're kind of on the same line of thinking to get this conversation going today. So I'm going to pass over to Professor Lisa Short now. Lisa is an authority and thought leader in frontier digital technology systems, design thinking, behavioral economics, education, transformational chain, blockchain, and crypto. She designs, develops, and deploys end-to-end digital technology solutions across different sectors and global markets, including the UK, Asia Pacific region, Africa, Singapore, Europe, and the UAE. I could talk at length on Lisa's pioneering international experience and achievements affecting positive change and social economic transformation, but I won't, we don't have time. So I'll pass the floor over to Lisa. Thank you, Lisa, over to you.
Thanks very much, Bridget. I know it's a bit of a mouthful. I'm just going to share my screen. It's always good when it works. Whoops, when it works. There we go. Thanks for that, Bridget. Much appreciated. And although I am known for techie, geeky stuff, I'm really actually talking about people today. So it's actually not so much about the tech and what I do, but certainly it'll be a contributing part in the conversation that I have. So this session is about a person-centered approach to security risk management. And I think even if we were talking about technology, as everybody knows, that I would always say that technology doesn't use itself or invent itself, we do. So I think that's an important part of this conversation as well. So, what is a person-centered approach? Now, apart from the actual definitions that I know that are out there, I really particularly liked this quote. Really, it is that's just It's recognition, and I would also say acceptance, that we can't manage the security of every single person in the exact same way. Different people have different profiles, and those profiles are subject to different risks. Now, that might sound a simple sentence, but that's a big, big mouthful to get your head around, because I think it's two parts to that. There's recognition and also there's accepting it. And part of what I want to just lead you into, and we'll lead into when we go into the breakout groups to get you to think about your own organisations, is the fact that humanitarian aid is often in very high stake or high risk environments. Often they're war-torn environments, they're very dangerous environments and so forth. And so it's important to think that human-centered or a person-centered approach and the design of those systems, and I am a design ecosystem thinker, so I think of the 4D dimensions. I think of how everything connects, not just in a linear pathway, but how it connects and interconnects. And of course, as we know, the intersectionalities between all of that thinking. So it's important that we don't think of the design in a linear way and a sequential thing. In other words, that A plus B is going to equal C, and it's going to happen every time that way. But we need to sort of think conceptually around this working in two ways. Listening very deeply to what people and communities really, really want. That's not just the people going into security, but obviously the people that are delivering it. And also testing new ideas through sometimes fairly rapid, or I would say vertiginous or escalating change, because often in these environments, it also happens very fast. And the prototyping and iteration that we get from that. So in other words, it's almost an agile, fluid way of thinking about risk management, because according to what we would call situational risk, in other words, what's happening right now. And if I can bring into this conversation, I've worked in really high risk industries of mining and resources, oil, gas, metalliferous and underground mining, really high risk industries. And they have these risk assessments that they do, which are called Take 5 and Hazard ID. Take 5 is literally taking 5 minutes to look at what's currently happening. And that means we're not only saying we need to manage risk, we need to give the onus of risk management and the skills and the capacity to the individual to be able to make the assessment and modify and be agile in what they need to do right now, situationally. So I think that's important at this. So it leads me into the fact that traditional methods of risk assessment are really full of charts, XYZ axis, types of risk, consequence, likelihood of injury, all of those sorts of things, and scoring systems. But the person that we're at, in this case, a person-centered approach, their objectives, dreams, and life just get lost somewhere in that, and all the different sectionalities and all the characteristics we talked about in the Mentimeter position there. So all of those characteristics, but also the intangible things, the things that they desire to want to do, the reason they want to be in risk management and the reason they want to be in the humanitarian aid sector doing security risk management, their dreams, their life, that can get lost in all of that. And the person-centered approach must embrace that, whereas the traditional method of risk assessment doesn't actually have much flexibility. It's not 4D. It's not like a cloud ball where you can put in a few words and hopefully you get to that intersectionality right in the middle that's a perfect spot. It doesn't work that way. So often our traditional processes in what we've always known are just tick boxes and statistics, and risk becomes almost that. And of course, the person-centered approach is really on the absolute reverse of that, almost, in the fact that we are going into that 4D type dimension, where you're looking at, well, that might A might equal B, but it also might connect to X, Y, Z. And so it's getting that 4D thinking that's really, really key in this conversation. I think the other thing that's really, really important about this is that in our current times, news media can mean that what may perceive to be unpredictable actions of an individual can now have an immediate, and it is instantaneous, 160 characters on tweet, and it goes out to millions of people, have an amplified impact on the reputation of services and certainly on the political and corporate institutions. So their viability as an organisation, because many of the organisations are, they're corporates, they're big entities that have budgets, they have risks that they have to manage themselves. So the immediacy of social media and the way we have digital news impacts how the message is delivered around what might go wrong or how others might perceive risk. And we have to be really, really, really careful that we actually take that into consideration. Instantaneous messaging and instantaneous tweets and instantaneous posts can, in fact, amplify unfairly security risk management and the requirements that we have for a person-centered approach. So we have to be really careful and mindful of that. And so it leads us to the fact that some services who are quite resistant sometimes to a person-centered approach because they are used to these tick boxing exercises. Remember I said it's about embracing and accepting individualism. Services are now, however, becoming increasingly concerned with reputational risk management and find that the demands of that means that we have to risk manage everything, every little tiny element of someone's life. So we actually almost go in opposing directions to what we're trying to achieve with a person-centered approach. And we have to be mindful and understand the intent and understand, this is very important because we have to also understand the intents and the concerns of the organisations and how do we balance that with ours as individuals and what we need, because they are an individual stakeholder as well. So I think that's an important concept. For the humanitarian sector, this often means, from our perspective, an intrusive and obsessive focus on every aspect of our lives and behaviours and potential behaviours and all the people we support. It can sometimes be overwhelming. It can also mean we have an increasing want or desire to proceduralise everything that we do. And that can create quite a defensive practice to say, well, no, you can't do that because we've got a procedure that says you can't do it because it's too, the risk rating says it's too risky. And so we actually find that proceduralisation somewhere sort of shifts and it becomes more important than the lives of individual people. And of course, that is the person-centered approach. But having an understanding of where that's come from, what's initiated those thoughts, I think is important, and how that does impact the organisations and possibly why they've got a level of resistance that's there. So, it can become quite intrusive. So really it does, I love this image where, and I know when we were preparing for this, we talked about like almost 4D balancing. I got to say I couldn't find a graphic for that one. So if you can manage, there's probably about actually 4 or 5 seesaws on there. It really is a balancing act of multiple stakeholders, each of them with differing intents and intersectionalities, and getting that balance right requires proportionality of all of them. And that's really the hard part. That's the tipping point. When one is overbalances, it will tip over. So it's a good analogy. So many stakeholders, and I know one of the questions that we'll be asking in the interactive feedback is, who are those stakeholders? Who should be involved? And is it not just the organisations and supervisors, the end users, the individuals impacted? Should it be the families of those who are impacted? What are their concerns? So there's a whole range of stakeholders that we need to look at, and of course how they intersect as well, and the diversity of each of those stakeholders. So it really is that, that balancing act to get a person-centered approach. I do want to throw in also the difference, and one of the questions that we have is, what does it mean? What does digitisation and the digital space mean, or what differences may it incur for a person-centered approach in security risk management for the digital world? So not just physical security, but that digital security. And there's a whole range of parameters that go into there, including, of course, mental health and online harms and all of those sorts of things, and also the impact of risk that we are exposed to in that space. But we have to think about it, because whilst the digital revolution is a very strong positive enabler, it does allow us, of course, to work. It allows us even, obviously during the pandemic, to be able to work in environments that we could not continue to work in. It does bring us new challenges, risks and opportunities. And this image is a fantastic one in the sense that, the digital pervasiveness that we work in, apart from the physical risks that we might face and the mental and other risks that we might be exposed to in the humanitarian aid sector that we have to manage under SRM, the digital pervasiveness is like a fog, because it is absolutely so pervasive. It literally is like the fog or the air that we breathe. It's certainly enabling us, yes, but it's also watching us. It's listening to us. It's examining our habits. It's actually creating patterns of our habits. It's using it for social engineering. It's recording our knowledge. It's influencing our thoughts. And it's certainly changing the way that we conduct our business and conduct our activities and tasks. So that means the risk profile has changed somewhat, because some of the risk we can't see. But if we are going to talk about a person-centered approach, we must take that into consideration. The stakeholders that are involved in that digital world must also be taken into consideration. And it is absolutely pervasive. So it's really important that some of the skills and the attributes that we build in the capacity building exercises for people who work in security risk management have the capacity and understanding to understand what we've got to consider. Because we have to be well informed, we have to be digitally informed. And I do like to connect this to one of the other sessions that we're doing on misinformation and disinformation. So in this digital world, and it goes back to the previous slide about the instancy of information, if that information we're basing our risk assessments on is not factual, or when it's misinformation, or in fact sometimes false information, that will skew and take out of kilter that balance that we need to create. And I think that's important. So when the balance is right, a person-centered approach focuses on the person and the strategy of building alliances of supporters and knowledge and capacities around the person that can cut through what we would call risk entrenchment and generate creative new ways to move forward with the individuals that embraces both the benefits and the challenges of a person-centered approach. And we can't deny there are challenges, but working together with alliances, we create the most support that we can. Now that leads nicely, I know, for Bridget into the next section, where we are going to talk about the benefits and challenges and have a Q&A session and a fireside chat. So I'll hand back to you, Bridget.
Thank you so much. I've been having some technical difficulties, so I hope there's no issue with my mic. I'd like to now invite our two NGO colleagues to the floor. The first is Philipp Burtzlaff. Philipp is the Global Health and Safety Security Advisor at CBM. He has over 10 years field experience in South Sudan, Yemen, Colombia, Pakistan, providing security-related support services to enable program delivery in challenging environments. Philipp is passionate about driving forward a disability-inclusive security risk management approach. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Sebastian Druchmann. Since 2020, he was the Global Security Lead for Bread for the World and DKH, one of the largest faith-based organizations. Director and member of the board for Lamoda, based in Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine. Prior to that, he was worked for German Business Protection, a Germany-based private security and risk consultancy. Seb holds a PhD in war studies from King's College. Welcome, Seb. Welcome, Philipp. Over to you. What are the benefits and challenges of a person-centered approach? I think, Philipp, you're going to start us off.
Thank you. So in a nutshell, CBM's person-centered approach to security risk management is is all about listening and learning from the staff and building trust relationships with the people we support. And this includes identifying the specific risks and vulnerabilities faced by people with disabilities and the appropriate mitigation measures. So let us look a bit more in detail what this actually means and what the person-centered approach looks like in a day-to-day practice. CBM is committed to improving the quality of life of persons with disabilities in the poorest communities of the world. And the world is making progress in tackling poverty. However, persons with disabilities are left behind. And 1 in 7 of us has a disability. That is more than 1 billion people around in the world. So with this in mind, we naturally don't want to leave persons with disability behind when we develop and drive forward our security risk management and our health, safety, and security culture in our organization. And this is reflected in our security policy. One of the key security policy principles states that, quote, individuals should not be subjected to any discriminatory restrictions. However, CBM recognizes that individuals may face different risks or be more vulnerable to certain threats because of their nationality, ethnicity, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, or disability. And under certain circumstances, the prevailing security context or specific risks to an individual because of their profile may require CBM to take additional security measures. And for this reason, individuals shall be informed of specific risks they may face and be advised how to minimize these risks. So it does mention the recognition, what Lisa was just mentioning in her previous presentation. And based on our policy document, we build and strive to continuously improve our approaches to health, safety, and security. For example, as part of our travel security risk management, we provide individual pre-departure security briefings or personal pre-departure security briefings that are adjusted to meet the specific requirements of the travelers. And we acknowledge that the personal security of our staff is impacted by their interplay between who they are, where they work, live, and travel, and their role in CBM. And I saw before Gavin Kelleher from INSO South Sudan is participating in the session. So I'd like to quote Gavin from a GISF blog on departing from a blank profile approach to NGO security management. And this quote is that the profiles of staff members are clearly not the determining factors in many types of indiscriminate attacks, including aerial bombardment, improvised explosive devices, or armed attacks against compounds and convoys. However, in many other types of security incidents, individual profiles do matter. So especially when considering the risk of kidnap, theft, violent assault, sexual violence, blackmail, detention, and extortion. And during the briefing sessions, we ask colleagues what type of difficulties they may face when traveling. We acknowledge that a staff member or traveler with a disability is more likely to face institutional barriers, which are an outcome of non-inclusive policy and practices, physical barriers due to physical inaccessibility or infrastructure and transport, information and communication barriers due to lack of information, accessible formats, and non-availability of accessible modes of communication, and attitudinal barriers faced due to the stigma of misconceptions and lack of awareness people have about disability. And where applicable, we include the personal assistants in the briefings and the trainings. We make sure that personal assistants have the same level of travel insurance, for example, and that thought is given to what contingencies would work in case the personal assistant becomes ill or cannot perform their duties during a trip. And we gain insight when we include our employees with disabilities actively in security and crisis management training and the development of best practices. A key learning is that there are no standard solutions. For instance, individuals who need to use a wheelchair, they may face a great variety of diverse challenges. And this depends on the level of independence, arm strength, ability to get in or get out of the chair, etc. And plus, like everyone, there's a varying degree of personal risk acceptance. All these factors need to be considered. Having identified the specific challenges faced by our employees with disabilities, we develop detailed guidance. And we use our own tailor-made health, safety, security trainings and briefing systems. So for example, CBM's travel risk preparation includes advice on how to overcome physical barriers in airports, hotels, potholes, streets, and traffic, or ensure that staff who require assistive devices know how to prepare for delays, problems with luggage, and damage to wheelchairs, and communicate openly about needs and vulnerabilities to colleagues, managers, travel agents, and hotel staff. Our trainings also addresses some of the risks faced in the field and the specific challenges of different disabilities. So these can include, for example, a blind employee safely passing a checkpoint, a deaf employee and a hearing colleague responding when shots are fired, or a team member in a wheelchair and a personal assistant exploring hotel escape routes in an earthquake zone. The delivery of information we provide takes into account the specific needs of people with disabilities. So for some safety security training sessions, sign language translation is employed to assist persons who are deaf, and written materials are made accessible for persons with a visual impairment using a screen reader. At the end of the day, much of what we learn is on the go. So fine-tuning takes place after receiving post-trip feedback from staff with disabilities traveling to our program countries. And finally, I want to underscore that key to our security risk management approach is building trust relationships and developing a space where we all feel confident to share our concerns. Because only when we are sure that we can talk about our disabilities without having to worry that they might lead to discrimination or prejudice will we speak out confidently, and subsequently our employer can offer appropriate measures that meet our requirements and also offer other types of reasonable accommodation that are part of our duty of care. So thank you very much for this brief overview, and over to you, Seb.
Thank you, Philip. Thanks everybody for having me. Good to talk to you. I'm going to share my screen quickly. I have an ill-spent youth in consultancy, so there's no way I'm attending any of this without a presentation. Let me just quickly start this. But I've limited myself to 3 slides, so do bear with me. It should be bearable. Can you see the slides? Great. I was asked to share some best practices that I'm usually not a very humble person in that respect. I'm very humble. I'm going to share less best practices and more give you sort of a view into the engine room. I'm going to talk less about the concept and the desirability of a person-centered approach, but more about how my organization is occasionally struggling to take such an approach, the challenges and barriers we occasionally hit, but still how we try to solve what I call the person-centric approach problem or person-centric approach conundrum. Just very briefly, I see this as being determined by 3 pillars, so to speak. One is scalability. The organization, where I'm the global security and crisis management lead, has roughly 1,000 people here in Berlin. We have another 600 to 800, depending on seasonality, in the field. We have a lot of people traveling at the same time. We're trying to do this, like many other NGOs, on a shoestring security and risk management budget. So I think we occupy sort of the middle ground between many smaller NGOs that can, do a lot of things on a more personal approach, on more individual, often manual processes. Yet we also do not have the sort of large-scale infrastructure that international organizations like the UN can bring to the table. So scalability to me means 2 things. One is what I just emphasized, the tooth-to-tail ratio, the ratio between field personnel and support personnel, i.e. how much RMO personnel, risk management office personnel do I actually have to engage with people to stem this. The answer is very, very little, and as such, we need systems. The problem is the systems we have available, and particularly the interoperability, is often extremely limited. Lisa earlier said that technology, doesn't invent itself. We do. That is true. On the other hand, the SAP or Oracle-based ERP systems that I'm using do come with preset limitations. And personally, I have very little influence on these individual limitations. So I'm very much looking at these limitations when I talk about scalability. The second challenge I have, or a related challenge, is personal data. There is often a struggle within the organization to make sure that data about individuals is at the right point at the right time. We do know a lot about our employees that are traveling. We do not necessarily make good use of that knowledge. There are, of course, and I mentioned these two things, data constraints. DSGVO, the German data protection regulation, is obviously a very tough problem. And in the post-corona time, we find that people are much less willing to share personal data than they used to. And that's maybe something we can pick up on in the discussion. The last point is legal liability. There's something called the informed consent trap. In Germany, we usually try to develop risk management or security processes to the minimum that the individual traveler is informed and can give their consent to the trip. The problem is that really enough? Did we stretch far enough? And how sustainable is that informed consent? How little can we do and still call it informed consent to satisfy legal liability? One underlying problem is the specific legal framework in Germany that is still very much looking for an equitable distribution of security. So if I have people traveling to country A, B, C, I need to provide them a similar level of protection than I provide to other levels, which is in stark contrast to what was earlier shown to, the very different approaches to security that the PCA sort of implies. So this equitable challenge is certainly one of the key problems. All three, scalability, personal data constraints, and legal liabilities, are literally the things that occasionally keep me up at night, along with the crises I occasionally manage. That being said, so the organization that I currently had is taking an approach to this that may feel familiar to some or most of you guys, which is a customer-centric approach. So basically, we're turning our traveler or our employees into customers. We try to give them the opportunity to tell us about their demands respective to security or risk management. And then we try to basically, through this bottom-up approach, tailor security and risk management solutions to their needs. That sounds like a fantastic solution. In the coming minutes, I will tell you primarily about the challenges I face here. I do firmly believe that a customer-centric approach is still very good. That's why I'm going to start with a strength. And I wouldn't be a good former consultant without a SWOT analysis at some point. But I'm only going to spend very little time on the strengths of the system and sort of emphasize more the challenges. I mean, first of all, the customer-centric approach is something that keeps my internal stakeholders happy. The finance department loves me because it actually has brought down requests for security spending because we're not using a one-size-fits-all approach. It has brought down costs for most destinations, has brought up costs for some, but overall, this is looking quite good. The PCA customer-centric approach has also satisfied individually focused, like workers' councils bodies that are very much looking into, am I treating person X, Y, and Z to their needs? And yes, I am. I've improved this because I'm not sort of painting everybody with the same brush. It's the customer-centric approach is also quite good when it comes to compatibility with corporate governance. Am I able to satisfy the various needs at the various levels? And am I able to adapt, for example, our new gender policy in this? Yes, I am, because I'm looking at customers, and if my customers are gender sensitive, I'm actually able to do that. In theory, this is also a very agile approach, and I'll talk a little bit more about to what extent this is theoretical and to what extent this is actually a valid thing. The weaknesses are pretty clear, and Phil mentioned them earlier. We're struggling to improve the last mile, right? Sometimes the last 3 steps entering your hotel are the hardest to take, especially if you're in a wheelchair. So doing this times 120 countries, times God knows how many project solutions, project locations, that is actually quite hard to do. We as the risk management office are prone to bottlenecks. Customers, if you have a customer-centric approach, the customer picks the time they engage with. You're not necessarily, engineering the process to the same degree. So if all customers come at the same time, the same happens at any Tesco's or Waitrose at 7 o'clock in the evening. You have long queues, and that is not a great service level you provide to everybody. And the result that you produce, if you look at person by person, is very inequitable. It's not a very homogeneous solution you provide. And as a result, and we'll come to this a little bit later, you may run into trouble that there are very different security levels you provide to people. The opportunities here are quite great. I mean, I have a high affinity to systems and technology, so my focus is very much on that. And I think there's a lot of scalability. I'm currently doing this for an organization with roughly 1,000 to 1,500 people. I could, in theory, scale up to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people, because I do have a large component that is automated. I do have a large component that in the future will become automated, and that allows me to gather data, gather feedback much easier than any manual process. It is actually also potentially giving me a better, more focused resource deployment on the risk management office side. I'm dealing with actual problems, new developments. The standardized portfolio that I can give people, that are basically, if you look at this from a supermarket point of view, the boxes I can put on the shelf and people can take themselves, I have very little engagement with that. I don't need a whole lot of time spent on that. Instead, I can focus on the nitty-gritty bits, the demands people bring to me, the moments where I say, look, I haven't thought about this. Let me, come up with a solution. And that is actually the way I want to spend my time. Last but not least, there's a lot going on in technology. There's tracking software coming online. Most of my insurances are now basically app-based, and I can connect them to a certain degree at least. And I'll talk about how much I'm able to do that in a moment. But there is a lot of, there's an openness to technological integration that is usually not very strong in our field. Most security people are not that much into technology. The threats I'm facing, well, one I pointed to earlier, there's an extent to which I'm not able to limit my liability. I know I have an open flank here. If somebody looks at what we provide to travelers, if the customer doesn't demand certain things, then holding a minimum standard that would limit my liability in case something happens is a question. Do I actually provide that in any case? More importantly, do I have a reliable traveler? Is my customer going to come to me and tell me, look, I have the following needs? Or is he or she going to be mum about it and basically say, look, if I tell Seb that I'm pregnant, he may not let me travel. As a result, regardless of whether or not the customer or the employee in this case is to blame for this, liability may still stick. More importantly, I may not be able to provide the protection to the person that I need to provide. So this is probably one of the most problematic aspects of the customer-centric, or indeed the personal-centric approach. To what extent is the person you're talking to reliable? Some few of you will remember Dr. House, MD, right? It used to be a very popular TV series, who said everybody lies. My experience in security is not everybody lies, but there's a fair chunk of people who like to, give you their part of the truth. Last but not least, it's very tricky on the security and risk management office side to balance. Because as I said earlier, right, you can't necessarily steer when demand is coming in. You need to tackle this. If people travel to areas because they've done duty as a customer and demand security, and they're running into trouble, this spills over into crisis management and you're stuck. On that note, I think I've burned through my time quite quickly. I'm just going to close it and hand back. Sorry about that if I took too much time.
No, fantastic. Thank you so much, Sebastian. That was very, very interesting. Both Philip and Sebastian, your interventions were exceptional. So I'd like the opportunity now to open the chat up. Colleagues, please share any questions you have. We're going to have all three of the panelists join. Lisa, Sebastian, Philip, and myself will try and moderate some of the questions. I have a few questions to start us off, but I do want to see if any of our participants have any additional questions as well. So why don't I start off? Sebastian, you talked about scalability and some of the challenges that you found in terms of being able to reach everybody. I wonder if Lisa has any technological ideas in how we can meet this scalability challenge, or if Philip has any examples he would like to share where he has been able to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. I think, there's a couple of things. So, obviously technology and the level of communications that we have is vast. But I think there's some important things. You have to have a consistent level of communication. So, I myself, again, experienced this morning, in a very small team project where one person was using email, one person was using WhatsApp, one person was using Teams, one person was using Zoom, and one person's using text. And no one had any of the information. So it doesn't, I think, matter the volume of tools we've got available, agreeing on the one that we're going to use that addresses the needs of the communications that's required. And again, we're going to use digital tools. We've got to always remember that if you don't have digital access, you can't, you won't have access. And again, I can use a very tangible example of a colleague of mine who heads up one of the big emergency departments in the UK. And during a Facebook outage, they used WhatsApp to connect and talk to the ambulance. And when that stopped, guess what? Communication stopped, which could be life-threatening. So I think scalability is one question, but I think we've also got to use fit-for-purpose technologies and have consistent use of those technologies to be fit for purpose. So, communications is key. And for any form of scalability, we have to take in, again, the considerations of what's going to happen on ground. So you have to have a backup. And so it can't, again, it's that thought that it's not always linear. You've got to have a backup for everything as well, of using digital communications as well, and make sure that you also double check if somebody hasn't received a message and usually would respond to follow it up. So I think it's they're people skills, not technology skills, really, aren't they?
Well, that gets back to the reliable traveller conundrum. Philip, I wanted to ask you also, you mentioned about inclusion, particularly of disability inclusion into training. And I wanted to understand from your feedback and the sessions that you've run so far, what were some of the key things that you thought would be useful to share here in terms of integrating disability inclusion and your particular bent into training and crisis management from a best practices purpose?
Sure, thank you, Bridget. I think, and I'm going to just connect to what Lisa and Sebastian were speaking about the role of technology and communication is key. So what we notice when we do security trainings and we do the briefings is that the tools we use, or the trainings where we use presentations, or we do handouts, or any kind of assets we use for these trainings and the briefings, they need to be accessible. So for example, we have a crisis hotline number in our organization, but it's not really accessible for someone who's deaf. So what do you do in this kind of situation? You need to find different types of ways how a person who can't hear would be able to make a crisis call. And the services we use, they don't provide any alternative solutions, so we have to think of our own solutions. And because we're a fairly small organization, so we have maybe 650 staff worldwide, we're able to provide very customized solutions. And I think one of the challenges we would face is this question about scalability, because as soon as it becomes a bigger organization, we have more travelers, it becomes more, you have to cover more different aspects, and it can become more challenging to be able to accommodate all the very specific requirements of people who are traveling or working abroad.
I think, from a UN perspective, we have not yet reached this space because, it's really individual dependent at the field level rather than a systemic approach to, and having systems behind us to support any of this. Like when I'm hearing like tactical examples of emergency lines and radio rooms and things like that, they aren't inclusive when it comes to really considering the full spectrum and all the intersectional factors we talked about before. And that's the time where someone needs it the most. That's the worst case scenario. We haven't even talked about some of the softer requirements when it comes to travel and things. So certainly from a UN security perspective, operationally we have a long way to go from a systems wise. But what we find, and this gets back to the scalability and the workload challenge that Sebastian put on the table, at the field level, we then have individuals that pick up this element and have these one-to-one, customer-centric, as you mentioned, kind of approach to dealing with challenges. But again, it's someone knocking on a door. So I guess my question to Seb then is, how have you found in your work, you talked a lot about the challenges, but how have you found to create, and I hate to use the word safe space, but I'm going to, trust in your security team for people to come and ask you and tell you, hey, I'm interested in this. Could you please give me some information? Or this is my vulnerability. Would you like to give me some advice on traveling here? How have you kind of built that trust within your organization?
Thanks for the question. Actually, let me do two things. I'm going to answer quickly the question, and then I would like to respond to something on the scalability and technology part, if I may. How did we create the safe space? Look, I love systems, I love technology, but in the end, it comes down to people, right? Other than being utterly charming, I'm occasionally very helpful. And that, I think, builds a bridge to many people that personally interact with me. And to a certain extent, my function is influenced by that. So, and this is the small things. In an earlier job, I learned that carrying somebody's suitcase is one of the best ways to endear them. We have a lot of people who may not hold a German passport but need to travel to Germany occasionally. So one of the things that I manage as sort of a byproduct of my work is visa applications for God knows. And most of the embassies know me by now and treat me quite different than somebody walking in the door. So that kind of level of helpfulness, I understand for most of the people that are traveling, or most of the main people that are deployed abroad and travel back to our headquarters, I just know them. I know their families. I ask how their families are. What used to be quote just being nice and courteous to them often opens the door. And if somebody is nice, helpful, and courteous to you, you tend to share trouble, right? You talk to them over coffee. I've moved many of the things that I used to do manually and that would eat up my time into automatic processes. So I do have time to just call people up and do a virtual coffee. And since we started doing that in Corona times, we've now rolled this out globally because people from Angola, for example, will not quickly come for a coffee, but a virtual coffee always works. So that, I think, ultimately there is a personal dimension, however much you use technology. Let me now come to the technology bit, which really at the heart of my interest. We often talk about a toolbox when we talk about technology. And I think that, to me, that's one of the fallacies when we talk about technology, and especially if we talk about data. Because the problem that we have, when I have a toolbox, I have a different tool for whatever I do. But the problem that my hammer needs to talk to my screwdriver is something that I rarely encounter. I have to be very careful here because I'm useless both with a hammer and a screwdriver. But one of the key problems I have in systems and systems architecture is I have an ERP system, and I have an HRM system, and I have a travel tracking system, I have a travel management, and none of these systems talk to each other. And the data that I get from each system is virtually useless when it comes to integrating with any of the others. In a previous life at La Moda, one of the key things I used to do is I did loss management. We were, people could online shop fashion from us across Russia and the CIS. And, not losing fashion is one important point in making, your business run. And we had warehouses that would, store the stuff. We had couriers that would deliver us. And it would, back then when I started in 2014, it was virtually impossible to understand, is this stuff at the warehouse? Is it at the courier, or have we lost it in between? And I think between 2014 and 2019, there was a giant leap in mainly IoT data that came in and allowed us to track that. I think we're going to see a similar convergence in sort of personnel-related data in a corporate context over the next sort of 5 to 8 years, where HRM systems, ERP system, all of these systems will start talking to each other. And my hope is that soon we will live in a world where My insurance provider, who has a fantastic app, will talk to my tracking provider that they can integrate. We're not quite there yet, but I'm as ever hopeful. And I think that will change fundamentally how person-centric approaches work, because then I'm able to actually store data on an individual. For example, say, look, that person has a penicillin allergy, sits in a wheelchair, and is hearing impaired. And then I can make that on certain levels, in certain circumstances, available to a medical service provider, providing an initial assessment on, are they, healthy or not? Do they need second level support? Do they need an evacuation? And they're able to provide that throughout the health benefit or healthcare chain that they then encounter. Sorry, talked very long again.
No, not at all. This is what it's about. I have a couple of questions in the chat. I've got Tala and Gavin. I'm not sure, Tala, if you want to turn on your camera and ask your question, or I'm happy to read it out. Over to you.
I can't. Can you hear me? I can't turn on my camera because I'm actually in a vehicle. That would be very dangerous. But my question is really about these, we're seeing it a lot. I work with a number of organizations, from UN agencies to NGOs to governments to private sector. And the question of people-centered approaches, inclusivity, DEI, all of this is now kind of coming up. And what I've found is that they run very much parallel and are not integrated in the overall long-term sustainable programming of organizations. They're kind of one-off trainings, or there may be a great nifty handbook on people-centered approaches. And more importantly, my question is trying to really tap into the elephant in the room, which is, where are these initial concepts coming from? What kind of perspectives? And because of the international and humanitarian donor and development community, very much based in Eurocentric colonial cultural norms, it's very much dictating the way that we are understanding this kind of research. And I'm speaking theoretically. And so I find that problematic. And so the final part of my question, and I know it's long-winded, is about my great push to promote cultural literacy in all of this, because it is very much cultural context that is misunderstood. And so I just wanted to add that. Thank you very much, Bridget.
What a fantastic and very interesting question, but I'm throwing it off to the panel to see who would like to start the discussion. I think Gavin has a question afterwards related to cultural literacy, so it's a really great combination, but we might start, Tala, with yours.
Yeah, I'm happy to hop in on that. It is a good question, Tala, on that as well. And I'd probably disagree in the sense that I don't think that the where the Eurocentric colonial norms, where this has been initiated. In fact, the person-centered approach has actually often come from, this is quite unusual, has come from the aged care sector. And so, and often there isn't intersectionalities between what we've experienced in other sectors that's moved over into this approach. So a true person-centered approach genuinely is very individualized around the individual. It's not being driven by the cultural norms or the concerns that we have from the organisations. In fact, it comes back, I think, to what I said before, two parts. Person-centered approach is not only recognising the need for it, but embracing and acceptance, the unknown, if you like, and the individualisation of it. So this is very much driven by the individual and their view and perceptions on that. And again, things like, as I said before, individualising the situational awareness. I do understand that the risk could be that the resistance and pushback for some of the solutions that we might put in place to manage the risk that's been assessed and determined by the individual and the organisations and the intersectionalities could give some resistance to some of the solutions that we have. But I think that's an ongoing challenge. I think we have to be very careful, or it will become a dead-end road, going down a rabbit hole. And it's often the same conversation we have around inclusivity. We have to keep the conversation about a person-centered approach a separate conversation to the one of the challenges of inclusivity and diversity, because that's an ongoing challenge. But I think being a person-centered approach brings it back to the individual as best we can. It's not perfect, but it certainly is. I think we've got to be careful not to blur the lines there in this conversation. So I think I do agree as well. I mean, obviously, you know, cultural awareness and cultural awareness is not just where we've been born and raised. It's also about intersectionality of age and all sorts of other things that come into that. But I think we can make the conversation, we can actually blur two things together, which we need to keep separate. And I often do talk about, for example, when we have a discussion about SDG 5 or gender equality, when you start those conversations, the next question you get is, but what about? It's two conversations. Gender equality is one conversation. Inclusivity and diversity about every other minority group and you know, marginalised group and disadvantaged group and emergent group are a separate conversation. SDG 5 is very separate. And so when we start to blend these conversations together, it means that we don't actually end up with any outcomes. So I think that's really, really important. It's a great question, because I think recognising that means that it does let us very much focus on the person at the centre of the approach is the individual. The stakeholders involved in the decision-making process may be multiple, and that's that tipping point and balancing. If that's the best answer I can give, I think, for that one.
What about you, Sebastian? I see your hand up. Do you want to jump in on this one?
Sure. Let me just, I mean, Carla mentioned three things. I mean, the first one is, especially when I look at this from the technology side, there is a great promise in, you know, having a person-centric or customer-centric approach to this, as in, you know, it forces systems necessarily to look more at individual, you know, what's important to you will be at the center of what you put into the system, and then that determines the profile that you have, if you sort of think about in the marketplace for security services and risk management services. That being said, all of the data I get, you know, on a systems level is standardized. So if your particular concern is not in there, the system will swallow it. So yes, I mean, whoever programs the system, whoever sets the agenda that we're talking about, is necessarily going to determine how the system incorporates your customer needs and your customer wants. That is one of the things that, you know, is very much at the heart of the debate. And here, I disagree slightly with Lisa. These are separate conversations, and it's certainly true. But when it comes to determining, you know, what do we want in the system, what do we want outside of the system, this is very much a struggle for attention. There will not be the infinite preference list that we can provide at any stage and still, you know, distill into a feasible, workable solution. And the last bit is, you know, the cultural constraints. I mean, any sort of discussion about, you know, that will eventually result in a system, the discussion is currently, well, not necessarily outcome oriented. And I'm phrasing this very carefully. I think there is now, both from, you know, if you want to put this on a political diagram, all sides, you know, something where it comes to comfort level. I'm not comfortable about discussing this. I'm not comfortable about discussing that. And that shapes the way we produce these systems. What I do believe as an advantage to the system is that we have diversified the way we're programming the systems. We're much more attentive to these type of topics. Do we leave something out? Yes, probably. Personally, I'm quite comfortable in having that discussion, but I do see organizations, including mine. I work for a faith-based organization. There are sometimes very, very difficult discussions we have to face. And let me add one last point, which I'm particularly keen on raising in this context. Right? We're discussing here issues that we implement primarily at a headquarter level. Structurally, the problem that I see is, hey, we're also working with people in the field, local employees. More importantly, we occasionally have short-term, you know, partner organizations that implement for us. I'm not able to extend the reach and the service level that I have at, you know, my organization to these people in the field necessarily. At the same time, especially the partner organizations that implement for us are those most in need of, you know, security and risk management services. So I do have this disparity. And if you then look at this from, you know, a cultural / colonial point of view, there's an awful lot of, sorry to say, white people that I care, that receive a lot of my care. And there's a lot of people, locals, that don't. And that is one of the key handicaps in a customer-centric approach. Where is your customer field? And who's outside of your customer field who has no say in this? And this is, I think, for any organization, a really tricky balance to strike, one that currently we're not striking particularly well.
Yeah, certainly the United Nations hasn't worked that one out. I mean, the way that we support and provide services to our implementing colleagues is not sufficient. And yeah, we still haven't got the answer to that one on our side either. So I would like to pass the floor to Gavin. Gavin has a great question. I'm not sure, Gavin, if you're online and able to talk. Otherwise, I can read it out, but it was related to sexual orientation and gender. Gavin, are you with us?
Yes, I'm not sure how well you'll be able to hear me. My internet can be a little patchy on my side. If it's good so far, I'll go for it. Thank you very much to all of the speakers and moderator. So my question is that I've seen quite an interesting challenge at the field level, and that's been about 2 or 3 years ago. I was working on research on this topic from a more theoretical perspective. So talking about a person-centered approach, looking at a more academic way of doing so. However, in the last couple of years, I've been based in Somalia and South Sudan, and all of a sudden you find yourself advocating for a person-centered approach that includes factoring in sexual identities, gender norms, things that really challenge a lot of the cultural beliefs of many of the places we're working. I think it would be quite easy to say that these are really conservative societies and perhaps, we need to focus on other areas, but the reality is these are the countries where traditionally a person-centered approach is going to be the most helpful, because this is where we see the highest number of NGO casualties. So my question in short is if any of the speakers have any ideas about how we can overcome some of these cultural related challenges that really ask us to implement some elements of a person-centered approach while leaving out others.
Thank you, Gavin. I think this is an exceptional question as well. I will speak a little bit from a UN Women perspective. That was my previous organization. One of the things that we had a number of challenges on this area, but one of the things we found most challenging was security people, and changing the understanding, or not changing, but kind of bringing it in line with the organizational expectation in relation to gender and sexual orientation, and providing risk management advice, even in contexts where it was more conservative or not appropriate to discuss. One of the areas that we looked at two areas drastically, because we realized it's a big fish and you've got to start in small chunks. So one of the things we looked at was recruitment, and we started recruiting security people from non-traditional backgrounds. And I know that's something that's said all the time, but we genuinely put our money where our mouth was, because that wasn't providing us the solution we needed. So the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So we looked at academics, we looked at diverse talent pools and really looking at skills rather than that. And we also looked at diversity in terms of meeting certain benchmarks, because we were not. And it was certainly, going back to Tala's question, very European looking security teams. The second area we really looked at was also education. And I'd say education and not training, because, you can train someone to hit a golf ball, but education is really trying to change culture, or at least change a mindset into seeing something bigger. So we really looked at education and trying to get management buy-in on that. But I'd like to hear from other colleagues if they have other experiences they would like to add to the discussion for Gavin. Lisa, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah. And same for me, from perspective of probably, I'm going to use some experiences with UN Women as well, in one of my current roles. And that's actually, the recruitment is critically important, but we also have to acknowledge that we've got quite a lot of traditional security people working out there that often, and it's quite interesting actually, when we look at it, tend to often come from military backgrounds and emergency personnel backgrounds. So we have a transition of cultural norms that are being transitioned across into other industries. But one thing that we've also starting to recognise into business, and it's coming from the thinking of UN Women and my work with the UN, is that when we know that there are controversial factors, don't send those people in there on their own when you have those initial conversations, and you're setting up and the support structures for them, because they will feel challenged by that. So partnering, buddying, mentorship of those circumstances is really, really critically key as well. And so ongoing education is key, but also knowing and recognising where we may have areas, is make sure we've just got good support structures there, so that we also get a balance of thought process and emotion when we go into conversations. And so there's a balance and a fairness there. So I think, mentorship and buddying is a really good concept, and a tangible way sometimes of sort of breaking that. We don't want to go in there defensive either, because that gets people's backs up. So we've got to go in there in that supportive, constructive way, and that works really well. So, and obviously always keeping communication channels open is key as well.
We're running short on time, so I'm going to ask Philip for a few brief comments before handing over also to Sebastian for a few brief comments.
Thanks, Bridget. Just to add to what Lisa was saying, Gavin, I've had the experience, maybe not, I can't say if we've overcome cultural related challenges through this, but certainly what we've been able to do when we offer regular opportunities for exchange, for example, through webinars during Corona times, to foster the discussion and have a topic, and then have the security advisors or security focal points from all the different countries we're operating in discuss a topic, or when we do security trainings, that we've opened them up so that participants, they can join either physically in person or virtually. And so you have participants coming from different cultures, different backgrounds, and it's really interesting what type of discussions come up, especially when it's about related to sexual orientation or gender norms. And it's really interesting to have these discussions in these kind of trainings or virtual forums. Over.
Sebastian, over to you.
Just very briefly from my side, I think there's about 5% of the organization you can train or educate on something. I'm fantastically intolerant towards intolerance. So churn. If you have people that don't get the message, get rid of the people, especially in the security sector. After a while, you find good people. I think the fundamental thing is you need to create an environment where certain rules are set. This sort of, as soon as you create pockets of intolerance, that spreads in the organization and creates a toxic workplace. You just have to sort of house clean occasionally. It's very unfortunate for the people, but I'm always quite clear on what I expect and what the culture of the organization is that I had. And then if somebody doesn't want to buy into that, find a different person.
Finishing on a very strong note, Sebastian. Yeah, I think two practical things from my side that you can write down, Gavin. ILGA and UN Globe are really great resources in terms of training and education. Also, they have a lot of field presence. And the other thing is the field enabling environment guidelines. I can share it with GISF I'm sure they have copies, and it goes into very practical examples of what actually can be done at a field level to change exactly what you're talking about. So there's a couple of tidbits to close the session today. So I don't think we have any more time. We've really run out, but it's a fantastic conversation. I'd like to say thank you to all of the panelists, Sebastian, Philip, and Professor Lisa. It's been fantastic to have a conversation, and thank you everyone for joining. I know we have a number of other GISF and SRM related sessions, which is up right now. So please take a screenshot, book in if you haven't already. We will likely be there along with a number of you, I'm sure. And we look forward to see you again. Take care, stay safe. See you soon.
Thanks, Bridget. Thanks, everyone.
The people doing the world's most important work are up against the biggest challenges. Since the 90s, security incidents involving NGOs have increased as their independence and impartiality no longer protect them. humanitarians are actively targeted as well as exposed to the risks of conflict and disaster, facing kidnapping, injury, and death in order to help those in need. And the threats to their safety means their ability to help diminishes too. NGOs began to create roles for dedicated security professionals, but they often lacked support and resources and worked in isolation. In 2006, a group of them from the UK and Ireland got together to develop coherent approaches to security risk management in the humanitarian space, eventually becoming an established network, the European Interagency Security Forum. With a strategic, inclusive and collaborative focus, the forum has created a centre of excellence, facilitates a peer-to-peer network, builds capacity for security risk management, and provides a voice for practitioners reaching over 100 members. In response to growing demand, it has now gone global, bringing different perspectives, expertise and resources to make core activities such as original research, trainings, workshops, and knowledge sharing more impactful than ever. As a result, organizations are able to build their security risk management on an even stronger foundation to keep more aid workers safe and enable sustainable access to communities in need. With a vision to see the work of the whole third sector done more effectively by supporting NGOs around the world, we are the Global Interagency Security Forum.